Now you can tell there's not a lot of bees that are bearding on the front, right? But now the hive next to it, this is the swarm we caught a while back. You helped me do that. We got a deep and a medium super in the middle. Gosh, look at that. Is that insane or what? I mean, look at that. They're hanging down all the way to the ground. Seriously? Now, why is this hive looking like this? This one is probably tighter with less boxes. Is it because the colony is smaller or weaker? No. You know what the difference is? This is a screen bottom board. Screen bottom board that allows ventilation. Solid bottom board. What's up, everybody? David Burns, EAS Certified Master Beekeeper, with you again here on a hot afternoon in July. Man, it's a burner today. 98 degrees, I think, with a heat index of 109. So great opportunity to get outdoors and make a video for you guys wondering what in the world are you supposed to do in the month of July. Got some great tips for you today. Well, since it is hot and usually humid in the month of July, depending on where you live, I know some of you are watching from other countries. Some of you are watching from southern states way up north. I know there's going to be a difference in the climate that we're talking about, but going to kind of clump it together and say most of us are kind of hot and dry or hot and humid. It kind of depends, but July is kind of that month when things start winding down. Now here in Illinois right now, we're going through a drought. Believe it or not, look at the grass. Wow. Look at the clover. It's even burned up too. We have not gotten a lot of rain. Now, yeah, the bees are still going in and out. They are bringing in some nectar. They are filling up honey supers. Even during a drought, bees are pretty good at going out and finding stuff if it's out there. Might have to go a little further, might have to find some unique places next to low river bottoms or creeks or something, but they're pretty good at finding some nectar out there. So hopefully your bees are still working too, but I know there are many places in the US that July brings about not only the drought that is kind of weird for us, but it can be a dearth. A dearth is described as a time of the year when the flowers have just sort of dried up. There's no more nectar out there for the bees to go to. Now, so we're dealing with hot and humid weather. What are you going to do with your bees? First, I want you to think about shade. Now, obviously, there's no way we're going to move our hives to some shaded area. They're too darn heavy, not going to happen. But we can bring the shade to the bees. Now, sometimes it's a good idea to put something on top of the hive. Look at this example here. Just take a big sheet of, maybe a half a sheet of plywood, cut it in half to its 4x4, and then you can lay it on the top cover, on top of it with a brick or something, a cinder block. Hold that down. You can use a piece of cardboard, but just remember, if it starts to rain, it could just make that cardboard melt away. So something a little more firm will help, some type of a wood, but it doesn't have to be a real thick piece of wood. But if you can put something that overlaps that top cover, and it's going to just make that shaded area all around that hive, especially during the hottest time of the day from like 10 to 2, you know. So if your bees aren't in a good place of shade right now in the afternoon, I know you can't take the bees to the shade. Bring the shade to the bees. Another thing you have to do right now during the month of July is you have to provide a water source. Now, you don't have to actually bring the water to the hive, but you need to have water somewhere on your property. And what I like to do, as I'm showing you here, I've got a bird bath. I put some sticks or rocks in there. Just a place that bees can go and get some water. They're using water. Listen to this. This is insane. It's so hot in their hive that they're bringing in water and actually setting it on the brood, putting droplets of water on the pupa, capped over pupa, to help maintain a cooler temperature. It's called evaporative cooler. I read once that bees can actually bring in 1 gallon of water throughout the course of a day on a hot day and disperse a gallon in there just for air conditioning. Just as it evaporates, it can help cool the hive. Now, that's what we do with our bodies when we sweat. That water on the outside of our face actually cools us because it helps wick away the heat when the wind blows against our wet face. And that's what bees are doing by bringing water in. But if it's really dry where you live and there hasn't been any rain, they're going to have a hard time finding water. So please create some sort of a place where your bees can go for water. Don't trust the nearby river, the nearby pond. That may work, but it may not. So provide a water source. Tip number 2 has to do with the drought, and not only the drought, but the dearth, and that's all about feeding. Now, you wouldn't think you'd have to feed bees in July because a lot of us still have honey supers on. I'm not feeding my bees when I have honey supers on because I don't want my sugar water to become part of my honey. But there may be a time now in July, that's another tip coming up, that we're going to take our supers off and we may not put any back on. And in that case, if you're done with your honey supers, if you've already harvested, you're not going to collect anymore, or you're going to leave one super on, to help them get through the fall and into winter, now's a good time to think about feeding your bees. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that coming up. But feeding your bees right now is critical. If you're done collecting honey, don't have your honey supers on, or you think they're just not going to do any more honey supers, it's time to deal with the drought. It's time to deal with the dearth. Here's what a lot of people make the mistake in doing. They oftentimes harvest their honey and they remove every drop that they can. I mean, 2 or 3 supers are coming off, they're harvesting, they're excited, they made 100 pounds of honey. Back at home at the hive doesn't have a lot of honey on there because we harvested all their excess. Now they're going to go into a July, August, September, October dearth period, a drought period, and they have zero stuff on board that they can use as resources. And get this, this is when they have the most brood in July and August. So when they need the resources the most is oftentimes when we take the most off, leaving them in a lot of deprivation of honey and protein deprivation by removing frames that they need protein from, maybe pollen. Now, it's risky when you start feeding bees in a dearth or a drought because all bees are looking for a source of food. And so if a strong colony detects that you're feeding a colony and they sniff out an entrance feeder, don't ever use an entrance feeder in the fall. That can induce robbing. Always use a top feeder. Feed them 1-to-1 sugar water. You can put a protein powder in that sugar water if you want to. We sell a mix for that. I don't really like using the protein patties, the pollen patties. I think it can attract too many small hive beetle, and they're pretty prolific this time of the year when it's hot and humid outside. So I don't want any more beetles that I have to deal with. So by putting my protein or my protein powder in my 1-to-1 sugar water and putting that on a top feeder in a jar, it doesn't give a chance for those beetles to lay eggs in those protein patties. But there are times you're going to have to feed. I know once you're harvested your honey, you're going to have to start feeding your bees to keep all that brood going. You need a lot of brood for winter. So you got to feed bees, especially if they're a weak colony. Some of you have been telling me that you have a colony that's not doing very well. Maybe you have a couple of hives, one's doing great, one's lagging behind. They haven't drawn out the combs yet and the foundation yet, and you're frustrated. Am I going to get the comb drawn out before winter? Well, you might have to feed them 1-to-1 sugar water because they have to consume about 11 pounds of nectar, honey, sugar water in order for them to produce 1 pound of wax through their wax glands. So if there's a drought and there's no nectar out there, pretty good chance you're not going to have any wax build up on those frames like you want to do. So you might have to step up to the plate, start feeding your bees. Again, take precautions. Don't let them rob. Don't let them get into that feeder. If you're feeding from the entrance or something, don't do that. Feed from the top and always check for robbing. Well, tip number 3 is all about it's time to harvest the honey. Probably where you're at, I know I've got a lot of honey to take off. Got to go out there and start harvesting that honey. Now, harvesting honey this time of the year, especially if it's a drought or it's hot outside, rough on the bees, rougher, more rough on the beekeeper. Hot outside today, I could not work my bees. It was just too darn hot out there. But when you start harvesting your honey in July and August, I want you to be sure and leave enough on there for your bees to make it through the next few months. I would recommend leaving at least 1 honey super on there for them. Now, some of you may be saying, hey, my bees have honey down in the 2 deeps or the deeps down there in the brood nest area. If they have honey in the brood, do I really need to, put more honey on top or leave honey on top? Yeah, you better for insurance because, again, they have a lot of brood that they're nursing along. Open larvae takes a lot of food, so they have a lot to care for in feeding new bees emerging and all. A lot of brood, a lot of population. They need a lot of food just for housekeeping details. So keep a honey super on there. Don't take every drop off. A lot of people take every drop off because they want to fill those jars up and make some money at the next farmer's market. But hey, remember, your bees may not have a good fall flow. We're counting on asters, which aren't great, goldenrod, and not a lot in the fall, and fall can be rainy sometimes. Your bees may not get a chance to fly out there and gather. So try to get honey off that you're going to enjoy to bottle, but try to leave enough on to help them make it through the next few months. Now guys, before we get into tip number 4, which is probably the most important one, I want to encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel here if you haven't done that. Click on the bell so you'll be notified each time I make a new video. Give me a thumbs up. Tell me you like this video. Oh my gosh, it helps me so much. Please do that now. Say you like the video, would you please? Now let's get to tip number 4. Now the most important tip is tip number 4, has to do with mite control. Remember, I started a new series. I'm going to be producing more videos on mite control, especially what chemicals to use, what treatments to use. We've already had one. And Apivar, we talked about that. I've got some other videos coming up about treating mites. If you want to use some chemicals or treatments to control mites, we're going to talk more about that. But certainly, I've got a lot of videos here on my YouTube channel about using green drone comb, powdered sugar dusting, screen bottom board, breaking the queen's brood cycle, especially in July, August, and September, to cut down on the mites brood cycle. That's so important. I have a mite control course that talks more about that, and many of you have purchased that. July 4th, I had a lot of you that purchased, thank you, purchased the half price deal on my online courses. I appreciate that. So get control of your mites, because look, mites are at their peak in July and August, and your bees are going to start going down in population because the queen just doesn't lay as much when it's hot and dry and not as much resources out there. So the populations of your bees are going to go down, but the population of your mites are going to actually outbrood your bees. Every time a bee emerges that's had the mama mite in their laying, you'll get 2 mites per 1 bee. In other words, a bee will emerge, a new worker bee emerges, but 2 mites emerge. So they begin to outbrood the bees in July and August. So you have to, red alert, sound the alarm, red alert. You have to do mite control now. Test for mites. Do a powdered sugar or an alcohol wash. Get some numbers, know what your data says, and then you're going to have to use wisdom in how you're going to get that level down to less than 3 mites per 100 bees that you test. Have to do it. I know it's like you don't want to, right? Can I just treat anyway? No, we don't like using treatments if we don't know what we got. Bees can become resistant to things like Apivar if we're just willy-nilly treating when we don't need to. So be sure and get numbers of what your mite levels are, and then develop a course of action to reduce the mite levels now, because you need healthy bees now going into winter. All right, tip number 5 is all about queen issues. Some of you are still trying to nurse along failing queens, or you can't find your queen, there's no brood, yikes. You got to settle this in July. Come on. You got to go out there, you got to cowboy up, get that hive queen right no matter what. You got to figure it out. If you can't see eggs, you can't see a queen, put a mated queen in there in a queen cage. Let's do something. You got to go to get that hive queen right. You got to do it. That's all it is to it. Stop wondering, stop waiting. Let's get a queen laying eggs in there in July. This is going to be harder to do in August and September to introduce a queen, and it's going to be really hard for you to find a queen. People that produce queens like myself, man, it's just tough to make them past July. So you got to get queen right now. That's tip number 5. You got to do it. By the way, don't just walk up to your hive and go, oh my gosh, look at all the bees. They're so populated. My queen's doing really good because look at all the bees flying in and out. Can't tell by the entrance. Can't tell by the population. You got to go look for eggs. How many larvae, eggs, and capped over pupae are in that hive. And then you know how well your queen's laying. I know it's tough to do in July because they're really populated. It's hard to do a real complete inspection. A lot of bees, pretty intimidating. Got to do it. Got to know how your queen's doing or you'll lose the hive in the winter. Tip number 6 is a fun one that I love to do, equalizing your hives. This is for people that have more than 1 hive. You may have 2 hives, 3, 4, 5, 10, whatever. Now's the time to start equalizing. You shouldn't be telling me, I've got a really strong hive, but my other 4 are really weak, I don't know what to do. Well, go grab some frames out of that big, gigantic, strong hive, equalize them out. Try to make these hives as equal as you can with the same number of resources and brood. That gives everybody a chance to get prepared for winter. So you can move frames around still with some nurse bees on it. There's no fighting much to speak of when you do that. Equalize hives by moving frames over. That's why it's always better to have 2 hives, better than just having 1 hive. You have some resources you can move around. When you move frames around, by all means, do not accidentally take a queen to the wrong hive. The 2 queens, one will kill the other. Make sure your queen is located before you move frames. Tip number 7, I spoke about it briefly about robbing. Oh my gosh, July and August, big hives are gonna rob little hives out. They're gonna be sniffing around trying to get that honey out of those weak hives that can't protect themselves. I would recommend you use an entrance reducer in the smallest setting if the honey flows over, and that way there's less area for the guard bees to protect from robbers coming in a big open 14-inch opening in the front of the hive. Also, it may be a good idea for you to check online, order some robber screen. This is really helpful. You might put that on there. Your bees can find their way out, but robbers can't find a way in. This is the time to do that in July and August. Don't let your hives be robbed out. Really watch them carefully. How do you know what robbing looks like? Bees are flying all over the place. Look at this video here. Now this video shows bees that are actually these are honey supers that I've stacked up together for bees to clean out and put a top on it to keep rain off of them. But this is what robbing looks like, actually. So bees are all around your hive trying to get in every nook and cranny. So be careful about robbing. Take the precautions, reduce the entrance, maybe consider a robbing screen once your honey flow is over. Finally, tip number 8 kind of summarizes everything, but it is a unique tip. Right now, you got to prepare for winter. I know it's hot outside. Winter's the farthest thing from your mind, but what are we, just 12 weeks away from September? Let's see, July, August, yeah. So, 10 or 12 weeks away from fall, and so we need to start developing bees that are strong, healthy, mite-free. So what you need to do now, reduce the mite levels, because even though you could kill your mites all in October before you go into winter with some kind of blast of azelaic acid or something like that, Formic Pro, hey, guess what? You kill the mites, viruses that the mites vector or spread are still in your bees, and they're going to carry those viruses into winter. So if you can get ahead of the game, start killing mites now, the next generations of bees will be less likely to have such an infestation of viruses that will take them out in the wintertime. So it's up to you right now, friends. Get control of your mites. I've already spoken about that. You've got to also have a great queen. Equalize those hives by moving frames around. You got to also feed them. If you're in a dirt or a drought, you got to leave 1 super on. And while we're doing these things, it is for winter prep. Tip number 8 is all about right now. Let's get some doggone strong colonies in July and August, September. We got to work hard now so that we can get them through the winter. All right? So you can't wait. You got to start now thinking this is all about winter prep right now in July. If you haven't seen my last video about using a particular treatment for mites, you need to watch it right here. I describe a treatment. I'm working through all of them to help you, reading the label, help you to apply these treatments to control your mites. Check this video out right now. I'll see you over there.